Today, I decided to take my two children, 5 and 8, to go see a Sunday matinee at the movie theater. The Secret Life of Pets 2 was nearly out of the theater, so we decided that we would be our best bet to beat the crowds. We went to the 11:55 a.m. showing, and stepped in a bit late to find we had a theater all to ourselves, and my kids were thrilled. I allowed them to dance around if we're alone in the theater. If others are present, they have to be on their good behavior and stay seated and quiet. Since the movie is older, it was in a room in the very back of the building, far away from anyone or other rooms. The previews were still rolling when a man, I would say in his late 50s, stepped into the room. He immediately started looking my way as he walked to the row behind me and proceeded to sit down directly behind me. Literally the seat and row right behind mine when the entire theater was empty. Now, I know adults can sometimes want to go to a children's movie alone. I realize that alone doesn't make him creepy. However, my gut instinct was this is very bizarre. In Toy Story or Lion King, sure, I would understand him being there. But this is a very obscure movie, and it's a sequel. Beyond that, why would anyone sit right behind me knowing it might look odd, that they are even present at this movie in the morning on a Sunday? I immediately got up. I'm around 6 feet tall, and I'll admit, I wanted him to see that I'm no easy target. I moved to the other side of my children and turned so I was facing him. He looked extremely uncomfortable since entering the theater, and he was very fidgety. His foot was tapping, and I quickly snapped a picture of my kids with the camera focused in on him. I moved my daughter to my lap so she was out of his reach, and I was racking my brain on my next move. I was in the very back of this building, with the sound blasting, and I had two children with me, alone in a huge room with one door leading out with this stranger. This guy was obviously a creep. You could just tell by his behavior and body language. I thought about complaining to management, but what was I even going to say? I mean, technically, he has every other right to be there, so I just kept my eyes on him. The movie started, and he watched for a moment, glancing my way and at the screen repeatedly with his leg still bouncing nervously. I started to form an exit plan in my mind. A minute or two into the film, he got up and hurriedly raced towards the door. I waited a few, hoping that he wouldn't return, and he didn't. I'm sure that I was making him uncomfortable by turning all the way around and looking his way. But all I could think was, why would he be sitting directly behind me in this huge theater room? I wasn't even in the center of the theater, and my placement with the kids was very random and not an ideal spot to sit. He could have grabbed me from behind and ran with my kids. He could have been a weirdo who wanted to take care of himself while watching my children and I. He never returned, but I'll never forget how he looked. As we left, I stopped by information to speak with the manager and another employee. The first thing they said after I showed them his picture and pausing was, "There were only 3 tickets sold to this movie, and we don't recognize him as someone who has at one of the other movies either. Those 3 tickets were for me and my children. The theater complex was completely dead. He had to walk by literally every other movie in this huge movie complex to get to the room that I was in. It was late morning, and literally most of the other movies all started at this time. Trust your instincts. Even if you offend someone, I've learned the hard way that you have to go with your gut. I still don't know what could have happened today, and I still have chills thinking about it. It could have been someone movie hopping, but many other films that started at that time. His seat choice and nervousness tell me otherwise." One of my best friends, Joe, we were both 16, worked at a movie theater in high school, and told me that they were doing interviews for the first 20 people that showed up that day at 2 p.m. Naturally, I ditched school and headed to the mall the theater was attached to, as I was eager to get my first job. As the second person in line, I quickly knew the job was as good as mine. The first person was wearing a tux, a full coat and tie, and most of the other people looked like they were just walking through the mall when they saw the posting. My ability to quickly get along with people means that interviews go really well for me. This interview was the first time I realized this ability. Little did I know there were hidden reasons behind this particular interview. As it turns out, the manager, Abby, around her mid-20s, that interviewed me was the best friend of Joe's sister. It was how Joe got the job. Once she asked me if I knew anybody that worked there, our conversation quickly turned to Joe and how awesome of a dude he is, which I wasn't lying about just to get the job. After a few minutes of this, the interview ended, and they told me that they would be in touch if I got the job. When I saw Joe later that day, he told me he was pretty sure that I had got it. And the next day, I was asked to come in and fill out my paperwork. Boom. Much to my dismay, I was hired with 5 other people who were all there filling out their paperwork. You mean to tell me that I'm not the best? I'm just in the rough top third. Whatever. At the end of our 90-day intro period, I'll be the only one remaining. A few days later was my first shift, and I was working with 2 other newbies, DeMarcus and Jane, plus somebody, Brian, who would have worked there for a couple of years. He was to train us as much as you can train somebody to tear tickets and sweep popcorn. DeMarcus and Brian were smart butts and talk constant crap like me, so I like them. Jane stays quiet and mumbles when talks. I'm indifferent to her. Over the next 90 days, DeMarcus and I become good buddies. Abby kind of looks out for me and gets me extra hours working on random projects. Jane comes out of her shell, which started on nice, but eventually turned sour. At the end of our 90 days, DeMarcus, Jane, and I were the only 3 kept from our hire group, and we were moved to work in concessions and the box office, while the new batch of people were hired for the theater cleaning. Jane and I were now working in closer quarters, which taught me 2 things. 1, Jane smells really bad all the time, and 2, she likes rubbing my arm. Indifference turns to constant annoyance of Jane's presence. Jane began making me uncomfortable constantly. I had spoken with another manager, Tara, about what was going on, and if she saw Jane and I working in the same area together, and our station didn't require us to be there that moment, she would ask for one of us to go do another task which would separate us for a short period. Well, one day, while exiting the break room, down a set of stairs with a 90-degree turn with landing, Jane was coming up to start her break. She cornered me on the landing, hugs me, stinking up my work clothes, and prevents me from continuing down the stairs. I told her to leave me alone and pushed past her. Abby was just outside of the door at the bottom of the stairs, so I told her what had happened. Now, if this story was a train, right now would be the point that the train pops off the tracks, shoots 10 feet over, and lands on another set of tracks heading for a dark tunnel. Abby's solution was to force Jane and I to work in these same areas more often, assigning us to registers right next to each other, and basically the exact opposite of what Tara did. Abby is now on my crap list. Around this time, someone who used to work at the theater came back. His name is Jim. Jim and I are both tall and skinny with dark hair, and people often comment that we look like brothers. Fun fact, Jim used to date Abby, but Jim now hates her but was in desperate need of a job, and he was friends with the general manager who had hired him. Abby began ramping up the creep factor. With Jim around, it became apparent that she was not over him, and her solution was to show me more attention, with or without him around. It made me a little uncomfortable, but nowhere near as bad as how Jane made me feel, who had now completely stopped her creep behavior. Abby tells me a plan that she is to take Joe to Disneyland for his birthday, and she wanted me to go. She wants to surprise him. So her plan was to go 5 months before his actual birthday. Pretty sure that he wasn't expecting it. The day of, it is me, Joe, Joe's sister, and Abby. Joe chokes on some cotton candy, don't ask how, and being the good friend that I am, I laughed uncontrollably and told him it would have been ridiculous to die at the happiest place on earth from cotton candy. He agrees, and I digress. Things were going well until Abby tells me the real reason that she had hired me, I reminded her of Jim. It had nothing to do with my interview or how well she thought I could do. I was her eye candy. I said something along the lines of, well, glad I was actually good enough to keep around. And then I started to speed up a bit to catch up to Joe. Abby then says, hey, guess what? Nobody else from work is here. And then she reaches out and grabs my butt. Screaming, what the heck? I ran to catch up to Joe. The rest of the day, she keeps trying to do this, and when that wasn't an option because I was sitting down eating, the next logical step was to lick the side of my face, jaw to temple. I made it quite clear that that was unacceptable with an eloquently worded, what the heck is wrong with you? Why would you do that? Since it was quite clear I was no longer having fun and the day was winding down anyhow, Joe stated he wanted to go home. It was a quiet 2.5 hours home. The following day, I was scheduled to work late evening and was told I would be tasked with touch-up painting all around the theater. Little did I know, Abby would be working the same hours. I wasn't thrilled to be working with her, and less happy that she decided to follow me around the entire night. She never once touched me, or made any sexually inappropriate comments, which I attributed to us being at work. However, what she did do for 7 hours was talk crap about every person that we worked with, the dirt that she had on them, and who she loved to screw. And this shift was the straw that broke the camel's back. When I got home at 3 a.m., I wrote a 5-page letter to the general manager explaining everything that happened with her. I explained that I didn't say anything at first because the most inappropriate stuff happened on personal time. But once I thought about it, there was so much wrongdoing from her that I needed to say something. The reason I put it in a letter was to make sure that I could get all of the details. After sleeping for a few hours, I delivered the letter to my manager and asked her to call me with any questions. The following 3 days were already scheduled off for me, and the next day I had to work was a previously planned staff meeting. We arrived at 8 a.m. and all staff is present except for one person, Abby. The meeting goes on like almost every other meeting. New policies, up-and-coming events, etc. Except there is a segment where the GM mentioned her open door policy for any harassment, and if they didn't feel comfortable talking to her, that she strongly encouraged them to talk to one of the assistant managers. She elaborated that any harassment would not be tolerated. Wait, was Abby suspended or fired? Oh no, what have I done? Yeah, my reaction was guilt. When the meeting ended, I went upstairs to check my schedule, which was located right outside of the manager's office. The GM asked me to come in and close the door. 2 other assistant managers were present. Crap, am I being fired? The GM very calmly says, you may have noticed that Abby was not present this morning. This is not entirely due to your letter. In fact, your letter composed much of what I had suspected, heard rumors of, or had less severe cases reported to me. I thank you for bringing this to my attention, and you shouldn't feel guilty for what has happened. This is the result of her actions. I looked around the room and saw smiles on all 3 of their faces. I never got the full story, but it seemed every manager had horror stories regarding Abby. I continued to work there for years and gained a lot of great friends. After I turned 18, I was offered a position as an assistant manager. The GM asked me if I would mind being a main point of contact regarding harassment claims, because she believed I was the best suited to work through the issue. I was happy to be trusted with this, and it helped me become someone the employees would talk to regarding any issues, work-related or not. Abby, let's not see each other again. Although dealing with you gave me the strength to help others. This story takes place 3 months ago at a karaoke bar. My boyfriend's older sister Angie and I went out for the first time together, and we went to this bar that hosts a karaoke night every Friday night. She had a guy friend named Paul who met us there, who had a crush on her, and he bought us drinks the entire night. We were having a good time. It was like 2 a.m. and we were sitting outside because both Paul and Angie smoke but I don't. But because I didn't want to stay in there alone or anything, I went with her. We found a wooden table with a bench-like seats and 2 of them sat on one side of the table, and I was on the other side by myself talking with them. Some random guy, Pete, was behind me, standing like 3 feet away, leaning on the wall, but like he was close enough that I could see him if I moved my eyes to the left a little bit. Angie is very outgoing, and so, as we were talking, she ended up asking him some questions. I can't remember what she asked because I wasn't paying attention to them, but rather the people who were talking around us. But he ended up responding and slowly was approaching my side of the table. And once he got to my side, he sat down beside me, at which I already started to get a weird vibe from him. I was talking to Angie about something, and when I stopped, Pete started asking where I was from, since it was clear I am not from England, since I don't have a British accent. I told him that I'm from Canada, and he told me he works for immigration at the airport, and to which I said, "Oh, nice," not showing much interest. He asked what I could possibly be doing here, and I replied by telling him that I was here visiting my boyfriend. Angie was even talking about how she was here with her brother's girlfriend, me, to other people that she was having conversations with. Pete had both his arms resting on the table, one of his hands holding his glass of whatever he was drinking that night, and then he moved the hand that was closest to me and put it on his lap. But being that I'm a very observant person, I noticed this and was starting to feel really uncomfortable. As Angie and Paul were talking about stuff with the other people who were outside, because my hand was resting on my lap, he moved over on the bench to be closer to me and reached for my hand and held it but really firmly and hard. I quickly pulled it away and moved myself over a bit on the wooden bench and put my hand that he just held on the table and held onto my drink. He put it back in his lap, and within a few minutes later, he was reaching under the table again, but this time he grabbed my knee and held it. I pushed the hand away and repeated, "I have a boyfriend," to him, and even Angie was like, "Dude, she has a boyfriend," in case you didn't hear the first 3 times we said it. And so we carry on outside for the next hour, and when it gets to 3 a.m. when the bar closes, Angie and I were going to go back home, but she decided she wanted to hang out at Paul's house for a bit and drink more there and stuff, and so I agreed. But all of a sudden, Pete asked, "Oh well, can I come with you? I'm only here for tonight and I'll go back to where I live tomorrow." And Angie said, "I mean, it's not my house, but if my friend is fine with it, then sure." So Paul allowed him to come along to his place with us. Angie called an Uber to get us to Paul's house. While we waited at the table for the Uber, Pete said, "We can go back to my hotel room and wait for an Uber. I'm staying right here." The bar was a part of the hotel. So Angie, of course, agreed, but I didn't like the idea that much because he kept saying how pretty we look the entire time we were going to his hotel, and plus, I didn't know how to get home myself since I had no idea even where I was, so I just followed them. We get in the room and we wait 10 minutes for the Uber. The whole time, Pete is full on staring at us, smirking, and for God knows whatever the reason was. We eventually got to her friend's house. Pete is flirting with me and even rubbed my leg again when I was sitting on the floor because I wasn't feeling too good. Skip to when we all leave. Pete tells us that he was going to book an Uber for himself, so naturally, Angie and I book a separate Uber to get home. But I ended up glancing down at his phone when he was booking the Uber, and he never actually booked a ride. He was just chilling on the app, acting like he was. I thought this was weird. So 15 minutes later, our Uber is outside. It's like 5 a.m. now. Pete was like, "Hey, can I just hop in there with you two?" And Angie replied kind of hesitantly like, Okay. But I thought your Uber was on its way though." And he was like, "I don't know," but with the weirdest tone in his voice. So he has a smoke outside of the car. He smokes as well before getting in. Her and I are in the car with the driver, and that's when I tell her that he never actually booked a ride for himself. We both looked at each other in confusion for a second, and you could tell that now she was seeming to be a bit more cautious with what she was doing or saying with him. So the plan was, the Uber was going to drop us two off first and then take him to wherever he was going. So because of this, she asked the driver to take us to the road before the one with our house on it, because she didn't want him to know where we lived because now she didn't really trust him. Pete finally gets into the car. I'm on the right side and she is in the middle, and he gets in on the left. The whole time, I can hear him trying to flirt with her and saying some stuff like, "You wanna hook up?" And then at one point he was like, "She can join in too." And she kept saying no a bunch of times to him. I was looking out the window because I didn't want to look at him at all, but when he said that, I gave him a weird look. But I don't think he really paid any attention to it. I looked back out of my window, and this is when it got a lot more weird and creepy. He kept saying that he was coming home with us, and not going back to wherever he was going. He was not letting up on coming home with us. Angie told him that we were walking home after a certain point because she didn't have the money to pay for the whole ride, which obviously was a lie. And he was like, "That's okay, I'll just follow you home, and we can have a good time." So finally, after like 10 minutes of this, she was like, "Can you pull over?" to the driver. And he was very confused by this, probably because he never got asked this, and said, and she was like, "Please, pull over now." And so we did. Pete started to wonder why she was doing this and asked, "What are you doing, babe?" And she was like, "I told you, you aren't coming back with us. Get out." At this time, I was looking at him directly. She was getting angry because he wasn't getting out of the car. She started raising her voice and was like, "We aren't moving until you get the heck out of this car and call yourself a different Uber." Pete started to get kind of serious now and was like, "Why? What did I do? I'm sorry." And she just replied, "Leave." To that, he told her that he was only leaving if she gave him her number, and she refused. And then he told us that he wasn't leaving the car until she did so. So she said fine and took his phone, put in some random number she thought of it, and gave it back to him. He was still trying to convince her to let him stay with us, but she wasn't having any of it and told him goodbye. He got out of the car finally and she slammed his door shut and told the Uber to get away from there and to take us home. I was worried the next time I went to that bar because Pete would be there, but I haven't seen him since this situation. I always wondered what would have happened if Angie wasn't as outgoing as she was and kicked him out of the car. I think we would have been in some serious trouble.